All right, friends, slight technical difficulty, but we're picking up again. We're pursuing this question of how the Zen form has evolved as it has moved to America. And we were just talking about a culture of respecting elders is not a primary strength of American culture, but it was a very strong part of the traditional Eastern cultures. So what are the other elements that we could explore about how the form has changed? How is Zen becoming a distinctly American Zen, a more egalitarian emphasis, more democratic emphasis in America? Zen comes from more patriarchal, authoritarian kinds of cultures. So how is Zen accommodating itself to the American mind?
Well, I think that, and you had said earlier that in America there's a spirit of democracy which somehow is being incorporated, and so the change from the enlightened master as all-knowing and who's had the final word no matter what, there's a broadening, and the Sangha is becoming more of the source of direction for the community, for the group, that the body of practitioners is becoming more predominant. In Buddhism, they talk about Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Buddha being the individual, Dharma being the teaching, and Sangha being the community. And so from that perspective, the Asian way was Buddha, that it was the singular individual. And maybe in the early days, after the Buddha died, it was Dharma, where it was the teaching, the Vinaya, and then now what's becoming prominent is the Sangha, or community, congregation, as the voice or the wisdom to be heard.
And I imagine there's various challenges that go along with the freedom with the authoritarian figure playing less of a role. It gives more freedom, a certain kind of freedom, to the students who are participating in the practice. But I take it along with that freedom, some maturity in the student has to happen in order for this teaching and these communities to thrive.
I believe in, and I don't want to speak for American Zen because that would be presumptuous, so I can only speak for myself and for what we are trying to do here. I think a change needs to happen in the sense that people are invited to step into what I earlier said, but we got cut off by our little machine, stepping into spiritual adulthood. You know, that if you do not have a strong jiki that knows every move and says, we're doing this now, we're doing that now, and you cannot delegate that to somebody else, then you have to bring the jiki into yourself and be that for yourself. So you yourself have to stick to the agreements, the 4 agreements we have here, and that requires, to become an adult, to not be the little child that hopes that somebody is taking care of them, some kind of authoritarian father or mother figure that's doing the work for us and I can be the child. I'm invited to become an adult, and I think that's what's shifting right now, and that's what I perceive is a paradigm shift, and we're kind of experimenting with that. We're not fish, not flesh.
Okay.
Right now.
So discipline. I mean, most people would associate the practice of Zen with extreme discipline. What is discipline? Why is it important, and what role does it play in Zen practice?
when I say that we are in space between all stories, I don't mean there's no discipline. I think it Zen requires to practice this way requires an enormous amount of discipline, and not just while you're sitting on the cushion or in the Zendo, but every moment of your life, because you're taking this on as a whole life practice, and it requires discipline. It requires to always come back to the point where you let go of your stories, and you meet life anew and raw and without preconceived notions. But it also means the discipline, to show up. For example, when we do a retreat, to be there on time, to sit on your cushion, to sit still. So it requires an enormous discipline all the time. I think what we're experimenting with right now is that we're taking the old forms, and I think that's paramount to look at, do they still serve us? Can they be translated into our culture? And if we want to keep them, how can we translate them into our culture? I remember, for example, my very, very first Zen retreat that I mentioned earlier. They took out the kyuzaku, the stick. That's the stick. So somebody goes to the altar, does a bow, takes out the stick, and then does the rounds, hitting everyone on their back. And I was terrified. I sat there and I was shaking. So they spared me that stick, and later explained to me what that was about. So I think and then I could understand it better, of course. Still took me a couple of years before I bowed down when the Kyuzaku master was standing in front of me to receive that hit. And it's actually not about punishing people, it's actually to help them with their pain, or when you're tired, to wake someone up. Why I am mentioning that is I think we need to talk about those forms so that people today can translate and understand what they're here for. Then they might be helpful, and then we can adapt them in a way. If we just try to bring from one culture that is an ancient tradition, into our modern Western world with different agreements, it just doesn't work. So talking about the forms is, I think, an important part of what we're trying to create here now, and an important part of the integration of an Asian tradition into the 21st century American Buddhist culture. Would you agree?
Yeah, when I think about discipline, I think about like weightlifting. Like it takes great discipline to lift weights, to go there. And when you lift weights, there's a point where you get an endorphin charge. So the discipline carries you over the inertia not to do it, one's laziness, and then you get the payoff of an endorphin charge and bigger muscles or more strength. I think in spiritual practice, discipline is very different. I think the reason that we would even use that word discipline is that there is a tendency for thought, for human consciousness, which has become dominated by thought, to avoid its original direction or original purpose. And we call that the emotional imperative or the personal imperative, where the self has become so dominant, rather than a guide, having a self as a guide, it becomes the executive becomes the all-knower. And it doesn't all know. The sense of self doesn't know everything. And so it takes a certain stick-to-itiveness or staying put to see through that. And so it's not a question of discipline in order to develop the mind of no self. It's discipline to stick with long enough to realize, oh, there's more going on here than what my executive is saying is going on. And that's a quite bright, brilliant thing to experience. And it's our birthright to experience that. It's not something that some people are better at or more capable of, or more disciplined people will get it and less disciplined people won't. Where you see a muscular person and you say, whoa, they put in a lot of time on lifting the weights. Or you see somebody, we call it samadhi, who is practiced a lot of sitting meditation. They have a certain energetic glow about them, which comes from their discipline. What I'm interested in as a teacher is people discovering what is naturally theirs. And it takes stopping, it takes pausing. And so in that sense, one has to pause the mind habit that continually feeds the notion of I am, which is opinion, condition, situation. Story is another way of saying it. That I am my story. And that, so the discipline is more, in every retreat I experience a point where I think, why am I doing this? This is painful, this is confusing, and that's the imperative. And that's the wall of self. And I also know, having had some experience, that if I sit in the midst of that dissolves on its own, and something brighter and more authentically true or human appears. And it appears because it's there to appear, not because it's added on by discipline or hard practice.
So the discipline doesn't create something. It's more, if anything, it's a clearing away of certain obstacles or
stopping.
obstructions.
Yeah, or just stopping. You know, that the discipline is stopping. You just stop. And one of the ways we stop is we just sit and don't follow the mind habit.
Yeah, I would say the practice of sitting still and being silent is taking things away in the sense like you would be peeling an onion, not in order to get to the, what do you call it in English, the inner part of the onion, because when you keep peeling there's nothing there.
That's right.
But you keep peeling, and our sitting still, our sitting in silence is revealing something that's always already there.
I want to talk a little bit about the iconoclastic quality of Zen. If you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha. Why? What's going on with phrases like that? What's underneath that? Why do you kill the Buddha if you see the Buddha?
How much time do we have?
You know, I know. It's your phone. How much space do we have?
That's a big question.
How do you kill the Buddha? That's more important. You know, and Western mind hears that phrase as a self-centered activity of coming forward as yourself and better than or dominating the Buddha. But initially, the teaching is to step away from all that is fixed. That's the real meaning of killing the Buddha. Is even if you have something glorious, if that thing that is you presume is glorious, like the Buddha, then and you fixate on it, it becomes violent. It becomes a point of reference, which then is contrasted with whatever you consider to be not Buddha. And so it's killing the Buddha is seeing everything as the Buddha. True killing of the Buddha is realizing Buddha in everything, as opposed to the single individual historic man who sat under a tree, or the notion that you are Buddha. You know, because if you have the idea that you've had some experience, some awakening experience, and then that becomes solidified, and you think you're that, then it becomes violent, and you separate yourself from everything. So true killing the Buddha is recognizing that everything is Buddha.
Or recognizing that saying Buddha and saying I see the Buddha is just another creation of our thinking mind. If I say Buddha, I have created something already that is kind of boxed in. So the underlying question is, who is it that's seeing the Buddha, and what's the Buddha? And it's another invitation to not hold on to any of the stories we continually create. And for me, it's another invitation to recognize, aha, I'm again creating stories. Here am I, and that over there is the Buddha.
Yeah, it's dualism. It supports a dualistic perspective, which we say is it's our birthright to realize that we are not separate. That we are one. That there is one movement, and that movement is change. I mean, that's the fundamental teaching of Buddhism: is that there's one fundamental teaching, and that's change. And so, if that's true, even Buddhism changes. There's nothing fixed.
I was going to say that idea of impermanence is one of the key tenets of Buddhist philosophy. So, as I understand you talking, then that impermanence is something that we have to experience very intimately in ourselves. We create a fixed understanding of ourselves. We create a fixed understanding of the world. And those are almost always limited. There's almost always more to the story than we allow ourselves to see as we do that. So is there something about Zen methods that help you see the fact that there is no permanent, solid self, unchanging self?
I will try to answer that from, a little bit from the question you asked before about, when you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha. We live in a place here that is, we have hundreds and thousands of trees. But the moment I walk about and I say, aha, tree, and another tree, and that's an elm tree, and that's a maple tree, and that's that kind of tree, I've killed the tree. But if I let go of the notion of tree, and I have this openness where I can just meet that, let's call it being, because we need to use language in order to communicate, but that the treeness in that being over there, then there's a meaning there. And that also relates to the impermanence you were just asking about. The moment I am capable of meeting the treeness or the madness, or the, not with 2T, or the Dirgakness, there is a true meaning there, and then there's also the recognition of impermanence. But when we truly recognize that, then there's also the absolute opposite, or the sameness, which is absolute permanence of everything as it is unfolding. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah.
Zen Master Seung Sahn used to teach hit. And in Zen tradition, teachers always, when asked a question, always had some device. And Gucci held up his finger. Zen Master would hit. Zen Master Seung Sahn would hit like that. And so that's the activity of impermanence. Because when you hit, that hit is gone. It's there, it dwells, and it falls away. And so this hit is not this hit. And because we have mediators, we can say, oh yeah, those are the same. But they're really not. That what happens and is gone. And that's quite mystical and quite brilliant. And I think it's why we like the moon. So the moon is such a romantic notion, because Dogen said, tonight's moon was not last night's moon, but moon inherits moon. And so, hit inherits hit. A demonstration of impermanence.
So impermanence is also aliveness.
Absolutely. Creativity, immediacy.
And the unfolding, the alive unfolding of permanence, as I would say it.
It's not the repetition of a cycle. It's a creative movement that has not happened before. Something about experiencing something over and over again tends to deaden the quality of the experience of that thing. It happens in relationships. You take the same walk every day, and you tend to go blind to the walk. Something.
It happens with ourselves, right? It happens with ourselves that we have the sense, of an I, my, me that has begun at a certain point in life and will end at a certain point in life. But we have the sense of this person being a continuity. So we lose the freshness of it, we lose the aliveness and the becoming new in each and every moment. And if there would be one thing, we do a lot of beginner retreats where we have young people, fairly young people in their 20s. If there would be one thing that I could make people, experience in themselves is that unique unfolding as human that they are in each and every moment. They take themselves so for granted and they struggle so much with who they are and what's not right about them. But when they're gone, nothing in the entire existence of the universe has ever been the same and will ever be the same and will ever be what they are able to bring into the world. So they're unique in each and every moment. So that's the beauty about the practice, if we can realize that.
Yeah, what they say, you can't step into the same river twice, because every time you step, it's a new river. And that there's great freedom in that. If you realize that's your life, then you're not bound by your opinions and your memories, which, as you said, are partial and limiting.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Any final words for the world religion class here? So you pretty much were right on cue. That was the next question I was going to ask. Are there any final words? You kind of stated it. But anything else you'd like to say before we close the interview?
You first?
Capping phrase.
Capping. I don't have a big capping phrase, but I
Tell your story about the bird.
No, that doesn't fit here right now.
Past. Impermanence of the bird story.
I mean, it's difficult to be a teacher. You are constantly invited into letting go of your own stories. And so what's my job as a teacher? My job as a teacher is to be of benefit to others. And if I had one final word, I would say, wake up to your life. This is not, there's no reset button. This is it. And there's only this one life, and it's incredibly precious to be alive. And we have an incredible responsibility. At the time of the Buddha, I googled that the other day, all world population, I think, was 350 million people. I think that's about as many people as we have now living in the United States. Now we're getting close to 7 billion, 8 billion. So every single one of us has an enormous responsibility for all fellow creation. So yeah, my final word is let's all wake up and let's do whatever we can to wake up to being human.
My final word, I would quote Leonard Cohen, who's a very famous Buddhist, Zen Buddhist, and who died recently in great loss. He said, "You don't do this practice except for love," and that it isn't that discipline becomes dry and stale. The cultural affectations, using chopsticks, wearing robes, pretty soon that wears out. But that what sustains us is love, and it's love for everything. And I would say find that and practice that, and you'll be the best without any label whatsoever.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.